This is Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. You are in store for a special half hour. We have two members of the California State Legislature joining us. We have Anthony Rendon, member of the Assembly, Adrin Nazarian, also a member of the Assembly. Mr. Nazarian represents significant portions of the San Fernando Valley, Central and Southeast Valley. Mr. Rendon represents significant portions of Southeast LA County, the gateway cities. And throughout this half hour, we're going to be speaking about water and water policy, one of the pressing issues of our time, especially in the state of California. Before we dive into the issue of water, I want to just talk a bit about your careers. What brought you to the legislature? Adrian, why don't we start with you, representing parts of the San Fernando Valley. How'd you wind up in the legislature?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I enjoy being here, especially with a good colleague.
Yes.
I started out as a staffer.
You did.
So I, right after college, was in the Coro Fellows program, which was a wonderful opportunity.
My uncle is Bruce Corwin, who you probably know.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. And so right after that, I spent some time in Congressman Brad Sherman's office, went to work for Governor Gray Davis at the Trade and Commerce Agency, came back down, worked for a councilman in Los Angeles.
Mr. Krikorian. Oh, no, not yet.
First it was Tom LaBonge, and then went on to work for Paul in the Assembly, and then back to City Council when he made the transition.
Anthony, you have a different path, but equally as important and as impressive, if I may say.
Sure. Most recently, I ran a Head Start agency, but I worked in the nonprofit social services for about 20 years.
And most specifically, you had been president of?
I was president of the Los Angeles League of Conservation Voters and executive director of the California League of Conservation Voters as well.
Yeah, so you know about water, you know about environmental issues. I want to get a sense from you. You're both in your first year in the legislature. Is it everything you dreamed of, or good God, get me out of this? Anthony?
I think it's great. It's the best job I've ever had. I mean, obviously, having worked in the nonprofit social service sector, this is very much an extension of what I did in that capacity.
Sure.
It's an opportunity to serve communities with a tremendous amount of need in the case of my district. But it's also an opportunity, I think what's probably most underrated about the job is just the sort of intellectual adventure. To have the opportunity to learn to talk about water and then education policy and health policy. This incredibly diverse state. People often say California is a small country. I say it's not. It's 38 million people. It's a large country.
It's a large country. Adrian, what about you?
I feel
Best
the
job
same
you
way.
can imagine?
It's an amazing job. I gotta be honest though, initially when I took office, I had certain hesitations only because having been a staffer during one of the most difficult, challenging times in the state's history, it was hard sitting across from constituents and letting them know that there was nothing that we could do when we were going through severe cuts. Thankfully that time has come and gone, and we need to just figure out what we learned from that time and make the appropriate investments so that we move forward.
And as we focus on better times, there are pressing issues. There's a prison crisis that we're facing. A K-12 education had been underfunded with Prop 30. Things are looking better on that front. And then there's water. And you know the cliche, Mark Twain said, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over. And there is no doubt that in California, water has been a source of contention for decades, if not centuries. Anthony, can you give us a sense of how this state, how so much of the politics of this state is wrapped up in water?
I think what happens when we talk about water, there tends to be this tendency to almost oversimplify the issue. Excuse me. We often get into this whole sort of, it's a north-south issue. It's not just a north-south issue. There is a north-south component to it, but it's also an urban, it's urban versus ag, or urban versus suburban versus ag. There is a sort of Central Valley versus sort of Northern Central Valley component to it as well. There are all these sort of overlapping constituencies that are all.
What I don't think Californians may realize is that 75% of California's rain falls north of Sacramento. There's a whole state above Sacramento, and yet 75% of the demand is in the south. And a lot of that demand is in the beautiful San Fernando Valley, which really, Adrian, is a semi-arid desert. I mean, there are beautiful lawns throughout the valley. But, you know, your community is closer to the coast, and so I mean, the valley's a desert.
Well, the way Anthony started framing the question, that's exactly what we need to look at. We first need to look at all the challenges, and then the mission being, how do we put into place a water system that's clean, consistent, reliable, and it's not going to cost us an arm and a leg in the future, because where we're headed, given the disjointed way of how we have federal, state, interstate, inter-district, regional conflicts and a setup, makes it very challenging for us to have a long-term sustainable
I mean,
plan.
that could be the understatement of the century if you think about it. I mean, in this state, we have a federal water project, we have a state water project, we have groundwater, we have local water districts, some elected, some appointed. It really is a maze that's hard to navigate. I want to get a sense, as we continue to think about water policy, where does the climate change debate play into this? Because one could argue, well, if we're warming up, we should get more water. I guess sea levels will rise, the glaciers will melt. And then also at the same time, we have population pressures. We are a growing state. Who wants to take that one or two?
I'll start by taking a stab at it. You're absolutely right. Climate change does factor into this significantly, as does population growth. Right now we're at 38 million. We are going to be at 50 million soon enough. While this population growth is occurring, we have climate change. About 50% of our snowpack is going to disappear in the Sierras. That is petrifying.
So, it's interesting. When you say disappear, that doesn't mean they will melt.
Right.
It won't happen.
It won't happen. Yeah.
So that's why this whole notion of rising sea level, well, I don't know. I mean, if there's rising sea level, what does that do in terms of the water debate? More water? Not so simple. Desalination?
Desalination is incredibly expensive.
That I know.
The technology is there, but it's incredibly expensive. It's prohibitively expensive in some at current times.
What's your sense, Adrin, of the population pressures?
Well, it's a extreme weight and for the infrastructure to even bear. I mean, then let's continue the challenges. There's also earthquake. There's the natural component of factors that have an issue.
If we look at our friends in New Orleans, we know what will happen.
Absolutely.
If the Delta levees break. We'll talk about the Delta later.
But then you also have an infrastructure that's been set up in Los Angeles, talking about the arid area. You're talking about infrastructure that's been laid out into the groundwork since William Mulholland. And now we're seeing the pipe bursting during the course of the last 5 years because of the old infrastructure that we haven't had the opportunity to reinvest in, and we need to be looking at that as well.
At the same time, I want to get a sense, if you have a sense, as to whether Californians truly recognize the importance of getting a handle on water policy. The tap keeps running. And so do Californians realize that we really are on the verge of a crisis, if not there?
I think to an extent they do. I mean, the Californians have consistently supported water bonds in the past. Water conservation, particularly in Southern California, it's sort of the revolution that nobody's talking about. We've added 1 million more people in Los Angeles, and we're using the same amount of water just because of what people are doing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so is conservation the answer?
I think, in my opinion, conservation is part of the answer. I think conservation is part of the answer. We need to, as Adrin said, we need to be smarter with the way we use water in our urban areas as well with respect to our entities.
But that begs the question. I mean, we have literally developed a desert. The days of being smart are probably behind us in terms of our land use policy.
To an extent, we have to have smarter land use policies.
Well, let's talk more about it when we come back. We are speaking with Anthony Rendon, Adrin, Nazarian about water policy. I'm Brad Pomerance, it's Charter California Edition.
California's population is expected to reach what level in the year 2025? 40 million, 44 million, 48 million, or 52 million? Demographers estimates that in the year 2025, California's population will reach 44.279 million.
Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by two members of the California State Assembly, Adrin Nazarian, Anthony Rendon. Both represent portions of Southern California in the Los Angeles County area. And we're speaking of water policy, as I mentioned. I want to speak with you about the bond. You know, it's kind of the boogeyman in the room, the bond. And the bond was actually negotiated initially in 2009. It was a very intense negotiation. You had the left and the right, north, south, east, west get together to come to a resolution for a bond that was valued at $11.14 billion. Was there pork in it? Probably, but negotiations are just that. They are negotiations. Okay, so what happened?
So, as you said, the bond was negotiated in 2009. It ended up at around $11.14 billion. It grew in the last few weeks. It grew significantly in the last few weeks. I wasn't there.
Yes.
Adrin wasn't there. But a lot of polls were taken, and it seems as though the sweet spot for a bond in terms of sort of voter appetite for passing a bond is between $5 to $7 billion. So it was removed from the ballot twice.
Twice. That's what's remarkable to me. In 2010, okay, midst of a recession, off-year election, bonds had more difficult times in off-year elections. But 2012, I mean, on-year election, big Democratic vote turnout, bonds tend to pass with big Democratic years. Why did it not go then?
It was just the mere size of it and the perception that there were tremendous earmarks sort of built into it.
So I want to talk about the perceptions. We mentioned briefly about public views, and you may have seen that USC and LA Times had a poll recently, and it talked about the water situation. And you know, significant numbers indicated that they understood the scenario. 21% said we're in crisis. 42% said it was a major problem, so that's a significant number. But then when you ask folks about incurring bond debt in that sweet spot of $5 to $6 billion, and we'll talk about where we're going on that front, you got 36% saying yes, 54% saying no. Adrin?
Well, we want the services, but it's hard for us to want to pay for it when we're already having the sense that we're paying for so much. And that's what's been going on. That's been our history. And going forward, we're going to need to be investing in infrastructure use. We're going to be needing to invest in education. We're going to need to invest in enforcement. And those three components right there, capital improvement, enforcement, and education, are so important.
Well, it's interesting.
In government role.
Yeah, we look at Prop 30, and Prop 30 was not doing well in the polls. And I'll be the first to say, on this program, I all but predicted defeat. I did not see it happening. It passed when we were still in pretty difficult times. 55% of the vote, that's not close. I mean, in political circles, that's a landslide. So there's no doubt that Californians do have a history of generosity when it comes to public investment. Last water bond, 2006, as you mentioned. But this is a steep hill to climb. Or is it?
It is a steep hill to climb. Right now, the polls look at around 51%, which you know is too low for a bond to start at. So it's a steep hill to climb. But I think, first of all, there's a long time between now and the November election, which in political terms is eons.
Right, so let's talk about the bond, because as we speak today, I guess the initial bond is a Prop 18, is that what it's called? That's still the framework with which we are dealing. But both of you, and you specifically as chair of the
Water Bond Working Group,
has proposed a different bond.
A different bond of $6.5 billion, so it's almost half of the $11.14 billion. It's significantly pared down. And what we essentially did on the Water Working Group was to basically blow up the old bond. We started from scratch, developed principles, developed categories, and sort of built from the ground up.
And let's talk about those principles. We're looking at drinking water quality, rivers and watersheds, water management, the delta, water storage. Important areas, groundwater, is that water storage?
Groundwater is part of water storage.
So talk to us about the process. I know, Anthony, that you were very involved in speaking with stakeholders. I'm not sure if Adrin was involved in that as well, but talk to us about the process.
Well, we wanted to ensure an open process. First of all, as you know, the $11.14 billion bond was simply regarded as too large, and the adding of earmarks at the end was something that was
Right.
viewed negatively by a lot of folks.
A lot
So-
of editorial boards came out against.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we wanted to make sure that we had a very open process throughout. So we began with principles. Our principles were things like, for example, we weren't going to add earmarks in the bond.
But are earmarks by definition, like, it's easy to bully earmarks, but sometimes they matter, sometimes they're valuable, sometimes they help.
That's true, and there's a lot of disagreement about what is an earmark and what is not an
Right,
earmark.
exactly.
It's fascinating how everybody, when I say we're not going to have earmarks, everybody nods their head and says that's a good thing. But I have this
Exactly.
project that's really important, and
Yeah,
it's not
right.
an earmark, right? So
Right.
some of it is a sort of a definitional issue, but we don't want to include sort of specific and special projects in the bond. We want to have competitive and open grants, and that also assures accountability as well.
Adrin, what's your sense of the Assembly water bonds proposal at $6.5 billion?
Well, it's a work in progress. Anthony's done a great job. And again, this is something where this is going to be our version, the Assembly's version.
Has the
And
Assembly...
then the Senate will
Right.
have its version. And then the governor is going to have
Right.
the ultimate say in how he constructs what he views to be the priorities for his administration. But going back to the issue of how this also relates, for example, to my constituents.
Sure, please.
I worked on AB 850,
Right.
Assembly Bill 850, which what it did was set up the financial mechanism for a rate reduction bond through joint power authorities in order to be able to finance future water processing facilities, which we're building two, DWP, Department of Water and Power in
Those
Los
are fighting
Angeles,
words right there, DWP.
is going to be building, well, yeah, they're fighting words, but on the flip side, they've also done some great work. You were talking about what the state has done overall. Los Angeles has been the leader in actually conserving water. There are places in California that do not utilize water meters yet.
Right.
Los Angeles instituted that a long time ago, and that has served as a mechanism for us to be able to gauge our water consumption. Despite the difficulties and challenges, Los Angeles, I think, has done something that has become a worldwide leader and someone that needs to be emulated.
Let me ask you about your district, because it is one that I think in some ways could be seen as somewhat of a bellwether. You have some very well-heeled areas, no doubt. You have some more challenged areas. My guess is a pretty high voter turnout in on-year elections. What do you think your voters would think about a $6.5 billion water bond?
I think, well, it's a great question. I always like to describe my district as socioeconomically so diverse.
Right.
You know, the president will come to a fundraiser at George Clooney's house in southeast part of my district.
Right.
Yet there are families that 7, 8 family members live in a one-bedroom apartment
Sure.
in the north side of the district. Very diverse, and the needs are very different. To me, what's been very important has been economic development issues as it relates to entertainment industry, for example, and or life-sustaining water issues because of the San Fernando Valley needs.
What about, if I may, Anthony, your district, which not as many well-heeled areas, is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah, more
absolutely.
challenged.
Right.
And so lower voter turnout.
Much lower voter turnout.
So what do you think your voters would think of something like
It's a
this?
good question. I think I've talked about this before.
Right.
My district has 8 cities. 4 of those cities have former council members in prison. It's it's nicknamed the capital, corruption corridor.
Right.
So what's really important in our district is accountability. People want to make sure that their dollars are spent wisely.
And if I remember correctly, you have some water districts in your community that are the subject of criminal investigation.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's a messy situation,
It is.
no doubt. When we come back, I want to talk more about the bond. I also want to talk about the Delta, because the governor is also proposing a plan focused specifically on the Delta. I know it's not your bailiwick, but it does color the entire debate. I think it's important that we discuss this. We are speaking with Adrin Nazarian and Anthony Rendon. They are both members of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
What percentage of Southern California's water comes from the Delta? 15, 25, 30, or 40%? 30% of Southern California's water supply flows from the Delta.
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guests, Adrin, Nazarian, Anthony Rendon. As we know, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over. But hopefully we won't be fighting over water come November 2014. I guess if you're an advocate of the water bond, whatever that water bond may be. You mentioned, Adrin, that there's the Assembly version. Is this going to be the Assembly version?
I'm sorry.
Presumably.
We're moving
Anthony's
forward with the
question.
bill.
Presumably, yes.
Moving forward with the bill, AB 1331. It's not final, but
Okay.
it is in draft form.
And the Senate will also have its own version, or could vote on the AB 1331 up or down. 2/3 vote needed?
Yes,
It
2/3
is.
needed.
And so I think the Democrats have 2/3 in both houses right now. It's hard to even know, but are you speaking with your Republican colleagues?
Absolutely, yeah. Mr. Bigelow is my
Yes, of
vice
course.
chair on water parks and
he
wildlife.
represents significant portions of Northern California.
He does, absolutely. Been meeting with him very often. I met with Minority Leader Conway quite a few times
Who's a
on this
hoot.
as well. She's fantastic.
Right,
a lot
Connie
of fun.
Conway's a
Then I'm
hoot.
going up to Reading, I believe it's next week.
Mr. Dolly?
Mr. Dolly to
Right,
do a
Brian
hearing
Dolly,
up there
right,
as well.
right.
So yeah, the Republicans are very much involved in this.
Because I have to think, if you can get bipartisan support, it's a different picture.
Absolutely.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the Delta. For Southern Californians, we don't really know what the Delta is. We've heard Delta, peripheral canal. We don't know what it is. What's the Delta?
The Delta is this fantastic natural wonder that sort of lies between Sacramento and the San Francisco Bay Area.
And what are the challenges facing the Delta either?
Right now,
place.
the ecosystem in the Delta is threatened and has been threatened for some time. There's also problems with salinity and problems with sea level rise as well.
Right.
Some of the San Francisco Bay flows into the Delta, and as sea level rise
Right.
continues, that's problematic for the Delta.
But is the Delta at risk of flooding, levees breaking? I mean, that's what we hear. It's if there's a Katrina-style earthquake, the Delta could flood, and we don't know what that means, and what does it mean?
Sure. Yeah, there's
Right.
significant dangers associated with earthquakes in the Delta region, which could cause the levees to collapse and what have
So there are levees at the Delta.
Absolutely.
As we envision them.
Right.
I want to get a sense, though, while the water bond is floating around, if I may use that cliche, we also hear the governor talking about what's known as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. We interviewed John Laird on this program, who was an assembly member, now head of the Department of what's it called? Exactly. Water resources.
The governor's
or whatever.
environmental
exactly.
guru. Right.
And so, what's the interplay between the bond and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan?
It's a good question. I get this question a lot. They're separate.
Totally.
The governor has his BDCP plan.
Right.
We have our bond. They're separate.
What do you think of that, Adrin? Because the however you just
BDCP.
say, pretty big.
It is.
$23 billion.
Well, over the lifetime of 50 years, it's going to actually grow to probably about 50 billion.
But yet, I don't believe that plan envisions going to the voters.
No, it's a investment made again through a conglomeration of funding sources.
Right.
Federal, state also water beneficiaries.
And
it's also, there's a portion of it that's also going to trickle down to the end users, consumers at municipal level, as well as potentially some farm area mid-state folks as well.
But what's interesting about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is the question of who is the beneficiary, because that really begs the question of who should pay for the $23 billion, whereas with the bond, it's a bond, so everyone in the state pays presumably equally,
Yeah, exactly.
I
Well,
mean,
the state has to pay the bonds
it's
back.
indebtedness.
Right.
Okay, so I want to get a sense from you, both of you, I should say, why now?
We mentioned climate change. California has always had a water crisis. We talk about California being in a water crisis now. True, but we're always in a water crisis.
Right.
As long as the state's been around, we're in a water crisis. What's new now is the fact that we're getting less water from the Colorado River because Nevada and Arizona are now getting their full share. What's new now is climate change, which is impacting, as we discussed earlier, it's impacting the snowpack.
Right.
And what's also new is the fact that the federal government has sort of clearly indicated that they're less interested now than they have been in the past in sort of grand conveyance projects that they paid for in the past. So we need to take care of our water needs now, and we need to do so as Californians.
Adrin, what's your sense? Why now? I mean, we thought now was 2010. Then we thought it was 2012. Why 2014?
Because, well, we've just been prolonging and kicking the can down. We needed to make these investments maybe even longer ago. And it's kind of reminiscent of our state's history and Los Angeles' history. At times, bad planning or the not investing at the right time has cost us a lot down the line. So we need to be investing in this waterworks, all the infrastructures that go into preserving a reliable, clean source of water, so that down the line it's not going to be more costlier than what we're going to be paying for the infrastructure now.
And so how do we, for those that are advocates of the bond, ensure that this does not become a north-south debate and therefore debacle? Because you think about peripheral canal. I know that's completely different. That's more of a Bay Delta issue. But when the peripheral canal went to the voters, the South voted for it pretty handily. The North just was like 95% against, and it went down. I mean, if this bond goes down, I presume your position would be the consequences could be dire. So how do we create a scenario, the advocates, whereby it's seen as good for all of California and not just ag or South?
Well, I think one of the things you do is you make sure you have a well-balanced bond, which is what we have. We have 5 different categories, almost evenly divided with $1.6 billion each.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. It's also important to make sure, one of the things I keep talking about is to continue to talk about a lot of regional projects. In the San Fernando Valley, for example, we have this tremendous groundwater cleanup project. Here in the San Gabriel Valley as well, there's another aquifer cleanups. There's a lot we could be doing with stormwater capture. So I think if we focus more on the local projects that we have in the past, that'll help with that north-south divide.
And as part of the bond, will local projects be able to fund their needs?
Absolutely. These will be competitive grants, and water districts from throughout the state will be eligible to apply.
I hate to talk about the politics of it, but I have to because that's what we do.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. There's no doubt. So we are looking at 2014 and an election then. It's an off-year election. You tend to see lower voter turnout, slightly more conservative voter turnout. In terms of the politics of it, are you well served putting the bond on a 2014 ballot as opposed to waiting until 2016 when there'll be higher voter turnout, presumably a more Democratic electorate?
A good question. The polling that we've seen recently is based on a 2014 election, so we're definitely taking that into consideration, but that's a real concern.
So now what? I mean, it's been polled before, and who knows, as we speak today, the Democrats face challenges with the Affordable Care Act. Although, then again, the Republicans face their own challenges right before the implementation. So it's hard to know. I mean, like you said, a year is 100 years in politics. But it really, I mean, so much of the passage of bonds is political and making sure. What's your sense of dream?
But this also goes back to the question you were asking before about what I think, what we both think is going to happen in the state, given the San Fernando Valley and its interest. At the end of the day, let's look back in recent history. Voters came to the conclusion in the state that it was important to have longevity in their elected leadership. And so they voted to modify term limits. They also voted to pass Proposition 30.
Who would have thunk?
And so that's a great investment in public infrastructure.
Right.
By the way, there's also many competing interests and needs. We're talking about education and educational facilities, for example. The need potentially surpasses $1 trillion when you look at all of the state's infrastructure of K through 12 education facilities.
It's tricky. But these gentlemen are members of the California State Assembly. They are Anthony Rendon, Adrin Nazarian. Very important discussion about water policy. Thank you both for joining us. My name is Brad Pomerance. You've been watching Charter California Edition.